Good morning. Today is Friday, April 25, April 26 of 2013. My name is Bruce Freilich. I will be doing an interview today. The person I'm with is Bob Miller, who resides in Montague, Michigan. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning.
I'm conducting this interview as part of the White Lake Environmental History Project, using grant funding from various local and state agencies and volunteer organizations. And we're here today in Bob's home on Glendale Street in Montague. Bob, have you had a chance to read and sign the release form giving us permission for the interview?
Yes.
And you realize we'll post the audio interview on the website for the Environmental History Project so that others can listen to your information.
Yes.
Great. Can you tell us your name, please?
Bob Miller.
And where do you live now?
5060 Glendale in Montague.
All righty. Have you lived at other addresses here in the Montague area?
Oh, sure. Early on I lived on Whitney Street and then on Stanton Boulevard and now here.
Okay. And are you comfortable sharing how old you are?
I'm 75.
All right. Do you have any family history in the White Lake area?
No.
Okay. What are your earliest memories of White Lake?
Well, I came here to work. I was graduating from Western Michigan University, and I received a call from the superintendent of schools before I even graduated that they needed a teacher in the middle of the year, and would I be interested? And so I drove up here. I had to get a map out. I'd never heard of the place. And anyway, I ended up getting the job, and I've been here ever since.
Approximately what year was that?
Well, I came in January of 61.
Okay. When you arrived in Montague, did you have any early memories of White Lake itself or of the pollution situation in the White Lake?
None.
Okay. When later on, after you lived here for a while, there began to be a controversy about pollution and the lake. Do you recall that period of time?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And can you share with us your memories when it became controversial?
Well, it's just that the entire community was involved and really torn apart as people took sides. And so that was as a newcomer to the area, I noticed that.
Sure.
Your neighbors, some of whom worked out there, and then the, I guess they called them they were activists.
Okay.
And it was very contentious.
What was your understanding of the pollution problem itself?
Well, it was groundwater pollution and pollution of White Lake, and in DuPont's case, pollution of Lake Michigan.
Okay. Has your understanding of the pollution problem changed over time? If so, how?
I don't know that my perception has changed much. Certainly became informed about all of the issues, and verification of the rumors that many of which were true. As that became known, then of course we all took sides, I guess.
Okay. And you say verification of rumors. Can you elaborate that a little bit?
Well, not really. It's all so long ago and
Okay.
foggy that I'm not
Okay.
sure how it all happened, but the allegations and the denials all were forefront, and bit by bit, many of the allegations stuck. they became, yeah.
All right. Did you go through an emotional response to this? Did you have any primary emotions about this?
Well, only surprise. I think I mentioned to you, and I certainly did to Margot the other day, when she was here talking to Jean. One of the things that stick with me is that companies need to stay in business. And their employees, of course, want to keep working. And people will say and do things in their own self-interest.
Okay.
And that is the corporation also.
What sort of changes did pollution bring about in the community?
I don't know that. I can't speak for the community because at the time I was too new to the area. But certainly the distrust
Okay.
in the companies and the management of the companies, and that was the big revelation that I gained from all of this.
Were you a fisherman at the time?
Yeah, I was.
And where would you fish generally?
I fished in White Lake and in Lake Michigan.
Okay. Did the pollution circumstances change that activity for you?
Yeah, but not immediately. I didn't. There were so many people that fished, and so many people that ate the fish that we just didn't think about it too much in terms of the pollution.
Okay. Did you have a family in the area at the time?
No.
Okay. You were single?
Oh, well, I had my family.
Yes, your own. I'm sorry. I wasn't clear on how I asked that. Were any of your immediate family affected by the pollution?
No.
Okay. Did you end up taking any action during the time when the controversy was going on? For example, writing letters or contacting government officials, things like that?
No. The activists, that's another thing that is a part of my memory, is that the activists, most of whom were, many of whom were young people, was an interesting thing to me. We had a teacher at the time, a young teacher, and his wife, and she was an activist. And she went to the meetings and she wrote letters to the editor and so on and so forth. The people that worked for the companies one man said to me, the school ought to fire him. And he wasn't even the activist,
Okay.
meaning in a way to get them out of town.
Right.
We wish she would go away. And meanwhile, the school is, my tax dollars are paying his wages.
Did you form an opinion about that conversation?
Well, yeah, it was just how strongly both sides felt about the situation. The man that made that remark was about to lose his job. In fact, I think he already had lost his job. And he was over 50. I had friends my own age who also lost their jobs, but they were able to go off into another area and go on with their life. Just a minor setback. But for those guys that were over 50 years of age, who thought they had it made close to retirement, it was over for them. It was over for them too soon, and you could say critical, almost deadly consequences for their retirement. So they felt strongly. That's my point, is that almost like if they could have just held off on the investigations for another 8 years, I'd have been home free.
Did you notice any visible effects from the pollution?
The only visible effect that I remember was the release of a gas cloud that killed a bunch of trees. And I happened to go down the road and notice all these trees by the side of the road appear to be dead. They were pine trees, and the needles were all brown and falling off. And I was down that road less than a week ago, and I didn't notice that. Why wouldn't I notice that? And then much later I found out that there was...
What road was that, if you recall?
Old Channel Trail.
Okay, and about what location approximately?
Oh dear. I'm unsure about that.
Or any, outside the city limits, west of...
Yes, certainly, yeah.
Okay. Would that be out as far as where before Old Channel turns?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I just remember it. I believe it was before that.
Okay. So on the stretch where it's running east-west, before you get to Lamos, the crossroad, and it turns south.
Yeah, I believe so. Right.
All right. So that would be within the general vicinity of both the Hooker and the DuPont property?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. How widespread was this
I don't know.
browning of the trees?
I don't know. It was not like the cloud apparently. Well, of course, it rode the wind, and so it went in a certain direction, and like a tornado on either side.
Okay. Shifting topics here a little bit. Did you have a viewpoint about community leaders during this time?
No, I didn't. I couldn't tell you who the mayor was at that time, even though if you told me, I would agree. But no.
And did you have a viewpoint of government and government's role in the controversy?
Well, yes. One of the things that, another one of the memories that I have of that was that the government, as always, was slow to act. And at least from the point of those people who were activists, if we use that term all the time, the government responded very weakly and slowly.
Okay. What did you understand, what was your understanding of what was happening regarding the pollution problems?
I understood that they were burying barrels of some kind of a bad substance.
Okay.
And that some of the barrels had rusted and leaked and affected groundwater, and people's wells were tested, and their water was bad, and anyway, it was a much bigger problem than we first thought.
Did you have a difficult time deciding who to believe about the pollution problems? And if it was difficult, why was it difficult to decide who to believe?
Yeah, well, that's my story on that. Is there was a whistleblower for the Hooker thing, and I knew him as a former student.
He had been in your classes in school.
Right. And he was tossed off as a former, probably disgruntled employee. And the plant manager was on Channel 13, well-spoken, with facts, and just plain denied it all. And what I tell people now is that I was certainly old enough to know better, but I believed the guy with the tie on.
Okay, the guy with the necktie. Okay.
And to my knowledge, that's the first time that I realized that guys with neckties lie just like the rest of us.
All righty. And I believe the whistleblower was identified later as a Mr. Dobson.
That's right.
Does that name sound correct?
That's him.
And I believe the manager, at least for Hooker, was a Mr. Colpoys or Colpoys.
I believe that's true. I believe that's correct.
I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
That's right. Colpoys.
Okay. What do you know about the efforts subsequently to clean up White Lake?
Not a lot. The startling thing about that, from a historical perspective, is that the cleanup has gone on longer than the plants were here. The plants came in about 1950. The early 50s is when they started construction. And I think the plants were operational around 1954, 55, somewhere in there. And the whole thing was over before 1980.
But the cleanup has endured for longer.
Right.
Do you have an opinion about the health of White Lake at this time? What is your impression of that?
Current?
Yes.
I believe it's, all I know is what I read, but I believe that it's coming back, and that efforts to clean up the water, the bottom over by the tannery, I do believe it's coming back.
Very good. Who or what do you think is responsible for achieving those changes in the lake's health?
Well, responsible would be the people who are constantly on the back of government and the EPA and various other agencies to test and improve conditions. I'm sure that without them, it would never happen.
So vigilance, local volunteers who are vigilant and pointing out problems.
And vigilant, persistent, dogged almost, is what seems to be necessary.
Do you see some changes ahead for the White Lake area in the future regarding the pollution and the status of the lake?
Well, just continued vigilance is always necessary with things like this. That's all I really know about.
Okay. What do you see as the community's greatest needs relative to environmental protection?
Well, the community since then has become a tourist community. Apparently it was years and years ago, before I ever got here, and then it fell into decline, and it was certainly not a tourist community when I came here.
Okay.
People had heard of Saugatuck. People had heard of Pentwater. Nobody had heard of Montague, or White Lake, or Whitehall.
Okay.
So it was not a tourist area like Grand Haven. Still is not.
Okay. Do you see any current or future needs as far as environmental protection in the community?
No, I don't think I'm well versed enough to answer that. And there may be some areas still that need watching, but I'm unaware. They used to talk about the celery farm as dumping nitrates, leaching nitrates, and I'm sure that is probably true. And how much of that affects the algae problem that they have in White Lake from time to time, I don't know.
Okay.
But prior to 1980 or so, we didn't even have sewers in town, in this town. They did in Whitehall. And that means a lot of the homes along Old Channel Trail, through drain fields and whatnot, their waste ended up in the lake and contributed greatly to that. So the community has made steps in the right direction. And
what kind of a future do you see for White Lake?
the future of White Lake right now seems to be tied to tourism, and it's going to be a struggle to keep that going. But there doesn't seem to be any other hope. I think that before DuPont and Hooker, this was a pretty quiet community.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple of small plants downtown. Chimont was one, and the Metal Studios was another. Small foundry. But the main industry in the White Lake area was the tannery, mm-hmm. and Misco, which is Howmet, had one small plant in Whitehall. In 1935 or 40, both of these schools put together didn't graduate 100 kids.
Between the high school in Whitehall and Montague, a total of under 100 graduates?
Right. And as you walk down the hall, which I have done, one night in Whitehall, I was waiting, my granddaughter was at a basketball practice, and I looked at these pictures that they have on the wall of the class of 1935, and all the graduates. And I just skipped over them. I went from 1935, and there would be like 40 graduates. And I look at 1940, about the same, 1945. And then all of a sudden they started jumping up. DuPont and Hooker did that. And Misco then built another plant, and then next thing you know, Whitehall is graduating a class of 165 kids. Whitehall by themselves. And Montague is over 100. So there's no doubt that those industries promised jobs and prosperity, and they brought both. They did exactly what they said they would do. They were good neighbors. They paid high wages. They sponsored softball teams and all of that. Gave used equipment to the schools. They had people elected to the city councils and the school boards. But then there was the dark lining. So it was a double-edged sword, and did they do what they said, what they told? I wasn't here, but whatever they told the city fathers, they probably did. It's what they didn't tell that is with us now.
Thank you very much for answering all these questions. I want to ask you kind of an open one here. I know you've got a lot of memories, and we're trying to condense those memories into a very brief period here on the interview. Is there anything that you would like to add at this point?
Well, no, I think we have to be vigilant. People that, corporations, with their people, they have an agenda. And we have to kind of look beyond that in our own self-interest, or the future of the community. Another business could come into town. It's not likely now, but another business could come into town of unknown origin. And we would welcome the jobs. Gosh, yes, we would. We need jobs. But we have to watch out. I say that our graduates leave the community because they have to. Whitehall has more or less 150 students. Montague has more or less 100 students. So there are 250 graduates every June. There are not 250 jobs. Because next June there will be another bunch. So if anybody came to town, they are welcomed because we need the jobs. But there's the other side of that, and we have to always think about that. Whitehall, DuPont and Hooker paid high wages. There was no better job in Muskegon County. They were secretive about their wages. A man told me, he was in administration out there, that DuPont drew a 50-mile circle, and they paid the top wage within that 50-mile circle as company policy. And so people that came to this town to work from Shelby and Scottville and Ludington and further, Hesperia, really had the best. They had the best health insurance when other people didn't even have any. They had the highest wages. I myself worked one summer at DuPont in the accounting office, and I was so intrigued by their salary that I filled out an application. The lowest paid guy on the plant, which I believe was the guy at the gate with the clipboard, was making $7,500 a year, and I was making $5,000. A 50% increase, and I knew I could do the job at the gate. And because I knew some people in the administration, they called me in and told me not to do this. They said, they understand my situation and all that, and I said, I don't care about any of that. I've got a wife and 2 kids. I need the money. And they said, don't. And they said they wouldn't hire me. But they were asking me to pull my application. Anyway, I took their advice. And within 2 years, DuPont had the first layoff, which cut them from about 400 and some employees, almost in half, to almost 200.
And you feel like these folks that you knew were actually had some foreknowledge that this kind of thing was going to occur, and therefore
none of the administrators,
they were trying to spare you
right,
a problem by having you withdraw your application because they could see this coming?
They knew it was coming.
Okay.
That's the other thing, is and I'm sure it's true in all corporations, but the people in the management positions aren't taken by surprise like the rest of us. They know things, and they just run the plant, and they do. It was a big shock to the employees, and they went with the smaller group of employees for a period of time during which the crisis hit, and then the handwriting was on the wall, I'm sure.
So you arrived in the community in the early 60s, and you had a career as a teacher in the public schools here in Montague until approximately when did you retire, Bob?
91.
Okay, so in round numbers.
93, I'm sorry.
Just over 30 years.
32 and a half years.
All right. Yeah, you can tell us the numbers, can't you? All right. I'd forgotten to try to get that detail earlier. I apologize. Is there anything else you would want to add before we close out the interview?
I guess not. I can't think of anything right now.
Bob, thank you very much. This is the conclusion of our interview with Bob Miller, retired teacher from the Montague Public Schools, regarding White Lake environmental history. Thanks again, Bob.
You're welcome.